Frankenstein, 1816, the year a monster was born. Frankenstein is one of the most important novels of the 18th century, and it will be find part of what at the time was conceived as the romantic novel along with a Gothic perspective. In this novel, we will find important themes that will be in relation to psychoanalysis, as well as an analysis in around vaccine theory, where basically it is about explaining how cannibalization is present in the work in such a way that the characters and the same situations will be expressed under a burlesque and even critical perspective of society. In addition, this analysis will address a bit of what was conceived from the same time on the subject of life and death in relation to science. Therefore, the novel will guide the reader in this way to make relationships with science but also with reason. Gothic novels focus on the mysterious and supernatural. In Frankenstein, Shelley uses rather mysterious circumstances to have Victor Frankenstein create the monster. The cloudy circumstances under which Victor gathers body parts for his experiments, and the use of little-known modern technologies for unnatural purposes. Mary Shelley employs the supernatural elements of raising dead and macabre research into unexplored files of science and known by most of the readers. In a way, Frankenstein can be seen as an allegory of the perversion that scientific development can bring, which has been conceived and written during the early phases of the Industrial Revolution. This being a time of dramatic changes, behind the experiments of Victor Frankenstein, the search for divine power is taken into account. As an important relationship of work with reality and the background of that time, it derived and took into account the theory of galvanism, that at this time was in relation to two main scientists, whose informed the experimentation frog parts they tried to return the being inert to life. Additionally, this work will be according to the literary analysis caused by cannibalization. This happens since unusual situations are used to be included in daily life. In the particular case of Frankenstein, it is obvious that the reanimation of an inert being made from death will enter into what is categorized as unusual, different, even satiric against religion, and what is not accepted by society. All this will be related to cannibalization because this theory specifically tries to include everything that happened in carnival as satire, mockery, and profaseness as something that is part of our society and from which we cannot separate ourselves. The peculiarity of grotesque image is the manifestation of a phenomenon in the process of change and incomplete metamorphosis, as the stage of death and birth and worth and evolution, a constitute features of grotesque image vaccine purposes. The attitude towards time and evolution, and consequently ambivalence, which is responsible for the expression of two poles of change, the new and the old, what dies and what is born, the beginning and the end of the metamorphosis. Talking about some of the important themes, I would like to highlight the light, which is linked to the subject of the knowledge and as enlightenment, since both Captain Walton and Frankenstein seek enlightenment in their scientific activities. The creature, on the other hand, is doomed to spend much of its life in dark, being able to walk alone at night in order to hide from humans. The idea of light as a symbol of knowledge also refers to Plato's allegory, in which darkness symbolizes ignorance and the sun symbolizes truth. Talking about some important things about the lenses, psychoanalysis is going to be pretty important here. The modern Prometheus is a character born from the materialization of an idea from fragments of death, organic matter. That is, the spirit materializes into a fragment individual, lifeless, and with great imagining power. This birth represents the constant duality that marks our existence. On one hand, the conscious or rational manifested in a torch of knowledge that lights modern Prometheus. At this turn of the century with scientific and technological progress, sensory perception that limit us to the world of image, which Freud will call the I, and on the other hand, the unconscious, where instinct, passion, and memories are found, the Ich. Finally, to talk about the historical context of Frankenstein, Victor Frankenstein is the main character in the history. He describes the struggle of finding the truth behind the physical world. In the beginning, Victor is excited, but after he creates his wild creation, he obtains physical, emotional, and psychological truth. Throughout the piece, the author relates the story to the situation of the society during 18th century. She creates a picture of the civilization where luxury, wealth, government, laws, and enlightenment are despite. That is why it is interesting to discuss the historical context of the story based on Shelley's perspective during 18th century. Therefore, Frankenstein incorporates the story of the 19th century civilization throughout the representation of women, enlightenment, the birth of science, and the concept of Marxism. The monster himself is a symbolism of birth of science and acquisition of intellectual power beyond common learning. Let's see this quote. At first, I started back, unable to believe that I was indeed who I was reflecting the mirror. And when I became fully convinced that I was in reality the monster that I am, I was filled with the bitterest sensation of despondence of mortification. This statement of Victor Creator signifies his extreme power of knowledge beyond human thoughts. During the period of 19th century, science emerged as a profession. It becomes one of the distinct points of learning during the said era. It means that Shelley is aware of the capability of science to create different entities. Science is one of the most significant points of the novel because it establishes the conflict in the story. When the monster perceives his face into the mirror, Shelley conveys the authority of science over human existence, because it has the power to create abominable creatures beyond expectation.